Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today we don't have a book review, we have a book chat, and today's topic will be a movie adaptation and corresponding book, and I'm talking about Project Hail Mary. Now, for the ones that don't know, Project Hail Mary was written by Andy Weir, the same author of The Martian and Artemis. I have read the three books. I have only reviewed one here on the channel, which is Artemis. It wasn't the best read, but on the other hand, The Martian and Project Hail Mary were both really good books, and today we're specifically talking about Project Hail Mary because there has been a movie adaptation that came out recently. I watched the movie last weekend and decided to just have this video talking about both the book and the movie, and a bit about movie adaptations in general, what I think of them, why some succeed, why some fail. Now, in terms of the three books that Andy Weir wrote, I think Project Hail Mary and The Martian follow a similar trope. We have a man stuck in space trying somehow to go back to Earth. Of course, the plots are very different. The Martian, which came out already a few years ago, including the movie, was also very successful, and I think it was very successful exactly because it was so trustworthy, so faithful to the book, and I think they did the translation quite well. With Project Hail Mary, I think the book is probably even better than The Martian. At least I preferred Project Hail Mary, but I think the translation wasn't as trustworthy, and so it wasn't as good of an adaptation, but I still think the movie was good. So just in general, for reference, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads and on Storygraph, and for the movie, I would give the score kind of like a 7 out of 10. I think it's a bit of a different scale, but I think for movies, for some reason, 10 is a better scale for me rather than a 5 out of 5. So a 7 out of 10. I think, again, the visuals are really good. I think they were really beautiful the way they did all of the different scenes, all the different characters. And I think the actor Ryan Gosling and also the other actors, which are a bit more side characters, did also a really good job. But I mean, Ryan Gosling as Grace did a great job. Grace is this teacher, this high school teacher probably, or maybe not high school, maybe middle school, I don't know exactly, can't remember, but that gets somehow involved in this space mission to try and save our planet, because the planet is cooling down due to this microbe, this astrophage that feeds off the sun, and it's creating kind of like a film between the sun and us, and so not as much sunlight is getting to our planet, which cools it down, which will mean that the planet will basically freeze and everyone will die, and therefore we need to find a way to solve this problem. And they figure out that there's only one star in all the stars around us that also has an astrophage, but is not infected in the sense that its light is not being dimmed. And so the crew goes to try and figure out why Tau Ceti, which is the name of the star, is special in that sense. Now, this is going to be a spoilery chat because I can't talk about the movie without talking about the book and the details in it and do a good comparison. So I will spoil quite a lot. I will try not to reveal the full ending, but I mean, I might touch that topic as well. But basically, the main story is Grace in the spaceship. He has amnesia. He is only recalling his past in pieces, and the same thing happens in the movie. Although I didn't think in the movie was as clear that he was having amnesia, it just felt that we were getting flashbacks of his story instead of him actually having recollections. Whereas the book, that is clear because he actually says that he has amnesia. So there's that difference, and I think that this difference reflects a bit the common issue with the movie, which is there are some omissions that us as viewers need to make that connection and make that jump, and a lot of times there is not enough information for the viewers to make that jump. But before I get into that, we also need to talk about Rocky, who is another character, an alien that gets a lot of this interaction, and truly it's almost like the pivotal part of the plot, because yes, we have this grandiose plot, the main arc of the story of trying to save Earth, but I think in truth there is an inner plot, which is Grace and his relationship with Rocky, and trying to understand this alien race and trying to communicate between them, trying to both figure out the problem of this, or the solution to this problem that is the astrophage. And so you have these two plots, one outer plot, one inner plot, if you want to call it like that need to work in tandem to fully achieve the resolution. And I think they did it well. I think both in the movie and in the book, these were done well in the sense that we have these two plots integrated into each other, and they feed off each other to lead to the resolution. Now, the characters themselves, I think, were also done quite well, aside from the few issues that there were, but that was more with the directing choices, in the sense that information that was missing that was quite important in the book, For example, Rocky, he is an alien race that is not carbon based. Why is that important? Well, Grace is established also in the movie quite early that he is important because he did a thesis on animal life not being based or carbon based, let's say. Because he was like, well, even though our planet has life that is all carbon based, that doesn't mean that across the whole universe all life will be. And they said, oh, since you think this and this astrophage is different, you are a specialist, look at this, please. And he looked, and the thesis was never mentioned again. But in the book, when he finds out that Rocky is a silica based form of life, I think it was silica, then it's a huge thing for him because it proves his thesis right. Even though he was ridiculed by others, this is a pivotal moment for this character to achieve a dream because he finally gets the proof of his thesis, which is a really big achievement. So we didn't get that resolution in the movie. In the movie, they didn't even mention any of that. It was just Rocky. It felt like Rocky had a different atmosphere that couldn't breathe in our atmosphere and vice versa. But in the book, we do get a lot of reference that temperatures are really high for Rocky versus for humans. He is silica based, we are carbon based. Of course, there will be differences in the atmosphere, but that was just a small thing compared to all the rest. They did make a small mention about the temperature, but then again, it wasn't obvious. It was just this scene that if you read the book, you know what it means. If you didn't, it was just people will think that it's just blood of the alien that is spewing out. But yeah, there is that issue. And then we have a question which is regarding the world building of this story, because again, the story happens mostly inside a spaceship, right? And that spaceship needs to be good enough for Grace to live, but also for Grace to do his investigation regarding the astrophage when he goes to Tal Ceti. The problem with this, in the book, you can all imagine, and it's quite well described, so you do feel very vividly that. However, in the movie, okay, that the ship looked big, you could see Grace moving around from place to place, but regarding the science, it was very dumbed down. What do I mean by this? Well, they didn't really explain anything that they were doing. It was just, oh, look, I think this is what's causing it. And so they would test it. They wouldn't really explain the rationale behind it. And they would be like, oh, I was right. Or they would just look at something and immediately find out. And okay, they understand that in the movie, it needs to be faster. We can't just stick around with the explanation for long. But it felt really dumbed down for the viewers. And I think the good thing about The Martian is how much the science is involved and how much we get to see the main character explain to us why he's eating so many potatoes or what he needs to do to have that amount of potatoes and survive his time in Mars. So I think that was a great benefit from The Martian that was missed out in Project Hail Mary, and I don't know why they dumbed it down so much to the point where there's barely any science. It's just, well, we see a centrifuge, we see them doing some tests, but the tests aren't even that extensive, so it was very hand wavy, almost like magic in one sense. So, and even the centrifuge, this is more of a pet peeve of mine. When he was putting two tubes in the centrifuge, they are not balanced because the centrifuge will rotate, right? And you need to balance everything that you put in that centrifuge so that it doesn't become unbalanced and breaks, because that's literally what happens in a laboratory. Even though if it's 0G or all G, you will need to balance a scale. And a centrifuge. And seeing that, it felt very cheap because it's so easy to just have someone who is a scientist will look at these things and say, look, actually, we don't do this, or you do this a different way. So there were these problems, all related to the science, which is part of the world building, that I think suffered. And I think that was the major thing that made me take out points from this movie, because again, very dumbed down. It feels like they don't trust the viewers to understand the science, because the science is in the book, right? So they can literally just extract that information, put it in the movie in some way. Of course, it doesn't need to be all of it, because then again, it would be a lot of exposure. But The Martian did it well with enough science, so I was pretty sure that Project Hail Mary could do it as well. But one of the things that I thought the movie did well was the pacing. I think there were low moments where we would see a bit of character development between Grace and Rocky, or even with Grace's flashbacks. And I think then we would have the big paced scene or fast paced scenes with a bit of action where he would go outside in space. They needed to collect samples. All of these things, they are quite urgent and also quite action paced, very fast paced in the sense that they needed to do that. And you see the ship flying, and then all of these things that could potentially go wrong. And you know that if they go wrong, they are dead or stuck in space, which pretty much means they're dead. So There's a lot of stakes and the scenes are done very well. I think the imagery is just beautiful. There were some shots that looked really, really good. I mean, kind of like Interstellar level. But at the same time, the biggest action scene of the movie felt a bit too Hollywood-esque. It was just a bit too spectacular. And what I mean by this is Grace needs to grab a sample. The sample escapes from his hands. For him to grab that sample, he needs to let go of his rope. He needs to drop and grab the sample at the same time and be able to still go back to the ship. And okay, that there are big action scenes in the book as well, but this one just feels like it's a bit too spectacular just to give that fake feeling that something is going to go wrong when we know very well that Grace needs to survive. Because it's obvious that they're not going to kill him, especially at that point in the movie, and we know that Earth needs to be saved at some point. So just creating that artificial stake feels cheap and doesn't actually benefit the movie. I thought, for example, the scene right after, when he gets back in the ship, they're almost escaping gravity of that planet, and then suddenly they get a hole in one of the fuel injectors and they're spinning so hard and they can't really escape that spinning, and eventually they are able to, but Grace hits his head, is passed out, and Rocky needs to save it. And Rocky has to kind of escape his bubble and save Grace. I think that scene was done very, very well. It increased the stakes to the right level because we don't know if Rocky's going to survive or not. And besides, he's an alien. People don't have the same connection as with Grace. So they think even if he dies, the movie could still go on because our main mission is saving Earth. So the fact that he could die raises the stakes of him actually dying, and that creates the tension of the action scene. And I think that scene was done well. It created the right atmosphere, and then afterwards, when we see that Rocky is kind of alive, kind of not, that wasn't done as well because, again, not very clear. We would have made it clearer if we had explained his biology and being able to tell, okay, he's putting this hot light on him because he needs hot temperatures, things like that. Those explanations I think would have been good, or at least explain his biology early on in the movie so that when he does that, we're able to understand what's happening. But I mean, overall, I enjoyed watching this movie. I think it is a good adaptation. It's not an amazing adaptation, but I think it was an entertaining movie and it was different from the usual sci-fi movies that are out there. I'm very curious to see how the people receive it, and also just to see, because it's science fiction and a lot of people compare it with Interstellar and movies like that, I think this one could actually be a bit of Martian, Interstellar, and Arrival in some sense. It has a tiny bit of everything, which all of them are really good movies. So I recommend go seeing it if you like science fiction, if you have this passion of seeing people in space trying to save Earth or trying to escape space. I think in that sense it's good. As an adaptation, it's an okay adaptation. It could have been improved a lot more if they were more trustworthy with the science part of the science fiction novel. But yeah, this actually makes me question, will they ever adapt Artemis to the big screen? Because they've adapted The Martian, they've adapted Project Hail Mary. I personally don't think it should be adapted because I didn't enjoy it that much. But I mean, maybe if they change a bigger part of the original material, it would do better. Who knows? What I know is I kind of want more books from Andy Weir. Reading them is very fun and they're very entertaining and educational as well. I really like Project Hail Mary because it has so much biology in it, which is kind of my specialty. So it's always good when I get to read books that rely on that and that do it well, which is really important. And I think Project Hail Mary did that. So let me know, have you read this book? Have you gone seen the movie? What did you think? Comment down below. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and you shall be seeing me on Thursdays and Sundays. See you soon.